us pray. We give thanks to God for the rich heritage of this province is found in our people. We pray that native-born Albertans and those who have come from other places may continue to work together to preserve and enlarge the precious heritage called Alberta. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Private Bills has had the following bills under consideration and recommends that they be proceeded with. Bill PR2, the Alpine Club of Canada Amendment Act 1987. Bill PR4, the King's College Amendment Act 1987. Bill PR5, United Farmers of Alberta Cooperative Limited Amendment Act 1987. Bill PR10, the Calgary Hebrew School Amendment Act 1987. Bill PR11, Scott JML Legal Articles Act. Also, Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Private Bills has further had the following bills under consideration and recommends that they be proceeded with certain amendments. Bill PR1, First Canadian Insurance Corporation Act, and Bill PR22, Rio Lee Williamson Adoption Act. I request the concurrence of the Assembly in these recommendations.
Does the Assembly agree? Opposed? Concurrence given.
Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill PR13, the Central Western Railway Corporation Amendment Act 1987. The purpose of this bill is to reduce the amount of accident insurance that the railway is required to carry.
The Honourable Member for Stettler has moved first reading of Bill number PR13, Central Western Railway Corporation Amendment Act 1987. Those willing to give assent to first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill PR13, being Central Western Railway Corporation Amendment Act 1987, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports. Yes.
Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, I have the pleasure today of introducing three guests separately. And may I begin, sir, by introducing to you and through you to members of the Legislative Assembly, Mr. Roger Clinch, the Member of Parliament from Bathurst, New Brunswick, who is Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of External Affairs. He's accompanied by Peggy Hutchinson. I would ask them to rise, sir. They are in your gallery, and I would ask the Assembly to extend a very warm, cordial welcome to them. I also have the pleasure to introduce, sir, to you and through you to members of the Assembly, a visitor in the Members' Gallery from England. This gentleman is in Canada on a Newfield farming scholarship. He maintains a mixed farm in England and is here to study the production of marketing of potatoes as well as the management of mixed farming business. I would ask Mr. Roger Mercier to rise, who is in the Members' Gallery, to receive the warm welcome of the Assembly. Mr. Speaker,
Basking.
thank you very kindly, sir, for your indulgence. It's a real pleasure to introduce this next individual to you, Mr. Speaker, and to members of the Assembly. She is from the Westlock area, has served on Town Council, and her husband served as a Member of Parliament for a good many years. And I can't think of a finer way to explain her than to use a quotation from an unknown Canadian who indicated that we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. As this individual exemplifies that so well, I would ask Mrs. Gladys Big to stand, who's in the public gallery, to receive the warm and cordial welcome of the House.
Calgary-Buffalo.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce to you and through you to a house a group that I will remember and treasure, my very first group of visitors from Alberta's finest constituency, Calgary-Buffalo. We have here 43 grade 10 students from Ernest Manning School, accompanied by 3 teachers, Mr. Jim Cottrell, Mr. Matt Christensen, and Ms. Linda Diamond, all of whom seem to be having a very fine time. I might note they are seated in the members and public gallery, and I would ask them to stand and be acknowledged by the House.
Lethbridge West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to introduce to you, Mr. Speaker, today, and to colleagues in the House, a young man from southern Alberta who's played a very meaningful role in the post-secondary educational system in Alberta. I know in the past year he's met with the Honourable Premier and the Minister of Advanced Education on several occasions to see that this government adopts policies that, in fact, are not only fair and equitable, but will be meaningful to the future young people of Alberta. Mr. Speaker, he is off to Ottawa to work in the federal scene for the summer and then to pursue his education at Laurier University. He's seated in the members of your gallery, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Ed Fetting of Southern Alberta, Lethbridge in particular, and I'd ask that he rise and receive the welcome of the members of this House.
Member for Calgary Northwest.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce to you and through you and to members of this Assembly a bright group of grade 6 students, 30 in number, and an additional group of 15 select junior high school students from the St. Vincent de Paul School, Varsity Acres, a school that 3 of my children attended. And I would ask that the students, along with their teachers, Mr. Ross, Mr. Nicolette, and 2 parents, Mrs. Piback and Mrs. Satori, all rise and receive the warm and customary welcome of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask my first question of the Minister of Social Services. As she is doubtless aware, and as those who are trying to live on social allowance, the income support to the unemployed in this province falls well short of the poverty line. In fact, the range we have calculated is some 40 to 57% short of the poverty line. Knowing that, will the Minister now agree to undertake a real needs test by whatever means she determines appropriate so that she can repair the imbalance of income support going to Alberta's poorest people?
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member has hit the point precisely when she talks about a real needs test. I might say that the poverty line is a relative indicator and is the average of Canadians across the country, excuse me, across the country, and therefore there will always be a high percentage below that poverty line simply because it is an average.
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Then I take it the Minister does not accept the federal guidelines which call for low-income cutoffs at 58% of income for food, shelter, clothing, and basic needs. Is she disputing the federal government on this?
Mr. Speaker, we have identified in the province of Alberta the relative cost of shelter, food, and clothing, and on that basis, that's how we have evolved the figures for social allowance.
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Following the 37% cut that she has recently implemented on the shelter allowances for social allowance recipients who are single, which puts them at 57% below the nationally recognized poverty line, will she at least reverse that horrendous cut to their living allowances?
Mr. Speaker, I don't think there would be anybody in this legislature would minimize the impact of the amount that is allowed for a shelter allowance in this province to single employables. However, as I have often stated in the legislature, in providing for the longer-term assistance after 3 months, of an amount that is half of what a couple receives, we believe that to be a manageable figure.
Well, final supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. It seems to me there's some real double standards in this province. There's millions of dollars for advertising a bad budget, but no money to fix the bad budget. My final supplementary question to the minister is, what will it take? Will it take the demand at the food bank to more than double again before this minister will change the income support package to the very people who have been impoverished by this government's mismanagement?
Mr. Speaker, at no time has this government or this minister ever indicated that an income was being provided to Albertans who are on social allowance. It is a safety net, and it provides for only basic necessities.
Edmonton Goldbar.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Premier. The Premier indicates that Edmonton single employables can't be going to the food bank yet because the cuts won't occur until the 1st of June. So I'd like to ask the Premier, Mr. Speaker, will the Premier then undertake to restore the food and shelter allowance for single employables so they won't have to go after June the 1st?
Mr. Speaker, my comments were in an effort to correct a obvious confusion in the mind of the Edmonton's Mayor Decor, who was commenting about slashed social services payments resulting in a run on the food bank, when we know that, in fact, social services budget has increased by some 18%, and that the ones that the honourable member from Goldbar is referring to do not occur until June the 1st.
Second main question, Edmonton Highlands.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate the second question to the member for Edmonton Calder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are to the Minister of Social Services as well. The Minister has been questioned on several occasions on the inadequate levels of social assistance in this province. It is a fact that our social assistance rates are far below the poverty lines, thereby forcing people on social assistance to rely on the food banks. The Minister continues to blame recipients by implying that they do not know how to budget or shop properly. Will the Minister please table a list of the criteria on the basis of which the current rates of social assistance are set?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member uses an interesting word in associating the word blame with comments that I have made. If the honourable member is saying that every single citizen of this province, regardless of income, is an expert in good budgeting, then that's wonderful, because there are a few of us who in the course of our lifetime have not been an expert and have sought outside assistance with that budgeting. But Mr. Speaker, I have made it very clear that social allowance is a basic safety net, and it does not go beyond that in terms of being an income for people.
A supplementary to the Minister. It's difficult to budget when your allowances are so low. Last month, nearly 17,000 Edmontonians utilized the Edmonton Food Bank, over half of whom were social allowance recipients. Does the Minister not consider it is the responsibility of her department that people have adequate food?
Mr. Speaker, it is the responsibility of the government to provide that safety net that I have mentioned. It is very interesting to note that in Calgary, who have, I believe that you would say in a comparable sized city, and also in terms of unemployment statistics and people on welfare, that they have a far less utilization, a lower utilization of the food bank. But I think it's important to note for the honourable member that there is a difference in the two metropolitan areas, and that she may well go to work at looking at why.
Supplementary to the Minister. I'm sure the Minister is aware that the two food banks are different in their roles. In view of the fact that over 6,000 children relied on the Edmonton Food Bank last month, does the Minister not believe that it is her responsibility to ensure that these families have an adequate income so that children do not experience malnutrition?
Mr. Speaker, the last figures that I am aware of showed, in terms of an overall social allowance caseload, that about 3% of those people that are on social allowance in fact use the food bank. I think it is true, in looking at the specifics of the food bank, that obviously it will show that a fair number of those people are social allowance recipients. But I might remind the honourable member that if 97% of the people who are receiving social allowance, and a number of those people have communicated with me, Mr. Speaker, and I've noted letters to the editor that say to me they are managing. And it is tough managing, but yes, they are managing.
Final supplementary to the Minister, talking about a lot of children. Does the Minister have in place and ready to go an emergency plan which will kick in if it becomes obvious that this province's food banks are simply unable to meet the demand for food? And if so, will she table an outline of that emergency plan?
Mr. Speaker, the emergency plan is an ongoing plan, and that is that this government will continue to provide a safety net for those in need. And if the honourable member is going about suggesting to single employables that they don't adjust to meet the shelter allowance that they will have as of June 1st, then she indeed is being a prophet and making it come true.
Little Bowl.
A question to the Minister. Historically, the food, clothing and shelter rates were established by certain reviews by the home economists of the province of Alberta, and then the rates were set. Could the Minister indicate whether that same procedure is in place now, or are the rates established by some other means?
Mr. Speaker, basically, particularly in the food area, there is a Canada Food Guide, and that's one of the basic tools in establishing the food rate.
Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My supplementary again is to the Premier about his somewhat troubling remarks on this subject. The Premier stated that a housing allowance of $180 a month is enough. Does the Premier have personal information that this is the case, and if so, what are the examples of good lodging that one can get at that price?
Mr. Speaker, again I was responding to the Mayor of Edmonton and his confusion over the social services programs that the government provides. I was thinking that perhaps the reason for the confusion is that he's trying to do too many jobs at once.
Leader of the Liberal Party.
Speaker, I'm glad that the great joy and anticipation of which they greet my standing here. My question, Mr. Speaker, is also to the Premier. Last week we learned that former MLA Stephen Stiles has been appointed to the Land Compensation Board by the Cabinet. The same Stephen Stiles had made some derogatory comments about the Holocaust. These comments
Honourable member, order. The matter that the comments are out of order. An apology was made to this Assembly. The Assembly accepted the statement the day that it was issued a number of years back, but please proceed with the question.
Okay. These comments were felt by Albertans to be offensive and sufficient, and as you say, an apology was made. Question to the Premier. As stated, his government does not condone the comments made at that time, but doesn't he agree that his government has done just that by appointing him now?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Well, Mr. Speaker, actions would speak much louder than words. Would the Premier consider revoking that appointment at this time?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Well, Mr. Speaker, last week the Premier said he had received no criticisms or complaints about the appointment. Now, is he now willing to admit that in light of the recent comments by the head of the Simon Wiesenthal Institute and others, and Brene Berth, amongst others here in Edmonton, that he has received some significant amount of criticism?
I haven't, Mr. Speaker. It's possible, I guess, for a reporter who wants to carry on in this way to find people who respond to certain things.
Well, isn't the Premier, Mr. Speaker, at all concerned that by appointing such people, this government is leaving Alberta open to criticism? They are willing to accommodate racists if he will have read the Gitter report, which he said he hadn't read last year when I asked him, as he now had time to read it, and would he not consider that such an appointment leaves us open to the accusation that we're racist?
Mr. Speaker, no, it doesn't. It does leave you open at times to, I think, some pretty cheap political comments. I might say, Mr. Speaker, a member of this legislature, 4 years ago, over 4 years ago, made a tragic mistake, apologized to the legislature, lost his seat, and now the opposition has tried in some way to continue to persecute him. Now, what I wonder is, should all of us have been at times brought to mind that we should apologize to the House for something? We have. We would hardly expect that any member having apologized would for all time then be chased around after his apology.
The member for Highlands on the point of the appointment.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I don't think anybody is trying to be unfair to the Premier or to the government. In order to convince the public that there is no tacit approval by this government of any statements that were made by that member or by the Aryan nations, will the Premier assure the Assembly that the first task assigned to the new Multiculturalism Ministry will be to tackle head-on the issue of questioning over whether the Holocaust existed or other forms of questioning of historical events?
No. Clearly out of order with respect to what's transpired last Friday, let alone all the admonitions which were hardly adhered to today. The chair recognizes the leader of the representative party, followed by the member for Highwood.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the provincial treasurer, and it's with regards to the business transfer tax that we've discussed earlier in question period. And I'd like to, the minister has indicated that he is reviewing it and looking at the implications for Alberta. We look at it in terms of the Alberta energy resource sector, which in 1985 produced a gross wealth of $25.4 billion and applied a 7% business transfer tax to that. We would find that Albertans would pay through that industry some $1.8 billion of tax to the federal government. Could the provincial treasurer confirm that ballpark figure, or somewhat concise figure, I would say, at this point in time in terms of his calculations, and is that going to be the future for Albertans in terms of more tax?
Mr. Speaker, there's no question that the member has put his finger on one of the very significant issues that will be considered by this government over the course of the next few months as we consider the impacts of the business transfer tax, the proposed federal legislation to replace, by way of a federal sales tax, the current manufacturer's tax, which will apply to a wide range of products being sold in this province. We're always mindful, Mr. Speaker, of the importance to protect our natural resources. We've seen the devastation left in this province by the National Energy Program, promoted by the federal Liberal Party and supported here by the current Liberal Party, and we know that we want to be on guard at all times to ensure that that does not happen again, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, any tax by the federal government which would move into our own resource area, controlled by the people of this province, would in fact be an infringement of that fundamental principle, and one which we object to very strenuously, very strongly, with most aggression we could.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the provincial treasurer in terms of agriculture. We produced in 1986 some $3.8 billion, and applying the somewhat same tax formula, that could mean at the stage of production, never mind the other stage of processing and so on, Albertans would, and farmers specifically that are under terrible stress at the moment, could be have an additional $266 million of federal tax imposed on them. Could the minister indicate in his review whether that figure is somewhat accurate, or has the government, through their review, come up with other figures, and maybe some even higher?
Mr. Speaker, again, I should advise the House that the agreement which this province has with the federal government in terms of exchanging information is that very soon, early in this month, we should receive a report from the federal government which will spell out for us the impact the proposed changes suggested both on personal and corporate income tax and on this so-called or referred to business transfer tax. I am not aware that we received that information at this point, but of course what the member does point to is the significant impact that the federal tax would have on those two fundamental industries. One, which I spoke about already, that is the intrusion into our jurisdiction with respect to a federal tax on our oil and gas resources. But more particularly, Mr. Speaker, the intention of the federal government now, as I understand it, and I am not, I don't think, giving away any privileged information, is that they want to maintain as broad a base as possible for the federal tax. And in doing so, there would be very few exemptions to the business transfer tax. One of the problems, of course, from Alberta's perspective, is that not only do we want to protect the resource industry, which is one of the key sectors in our economy, but obviously we're very concerned about the agricultural sector being the second sector, which is a priority to us. What is being suggested, Mr. Speaker, is that if there is a problem, the federal government may consider so-called zero rating certain areas or certain sectors to protect them from the impact of that tax. But in doing so, obviously, you're drawn into immediate conflict with other sectors or with other groups who are securing or attempting to secure the same kind of exemption from that tax. If it is the intention, Mr. Speaker, of the federal government to tax as widely as possible, as the member has referred to, both the income implications for the federal government is significant, but obviously the dislocation to our own sectors must be considered by our government, and that, in fact, is what we will be doing.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary. In the area of tourism, where we hope to have some diversification in the province of Alberta, in 1986 it was a $2.3 billion industry. Applying the business transfer tax to that, it would be some $161 million. Could the minister indicate whether there's any intention in terms of that industry being taken out of the business transfer tax area, or is it the information of the minister that the business transfer tax will apply there as well and hurt the industry significantly?
Essentially, Mr. Speaker, the comments I made about the federal government intention to maintain as broad a base as possible is clearly applicable to this area as well. But moreover, Mr. Speaker, the intention of the business transfer tax, as I now understand it, is to apply to those other sectors which are not now taxed, such as the finance sector, for example, and even professional billing, for example, will be affected by this tax. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the member and I could go on all afternoon mentioning various sectors. I can only say now that the information we have so far is that it will be a very widely based tax. We are determining to the limits of our information and availability of data the impact on certain sectors and attempting, Mr. Speaker, to determine whether or not it will affect consumption, investment, or whether it will affect the saving side of the economy. Once we have that, I'd be glad to bring forward as much information as available so that my colleague who has a particular interest in this, the member from Littlebow, would be able to evaluate and perhaps even provide some advice to the government as to how to respond.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary to the provincial treasurer. Following the June 18th presentation of material, would the minister consider and would the government consider a major debate on this issue in the Assembly so that the full legislature is able to give their opinions on the effect on various sectors and as well on Alberta as a whole?
Again, Mr. Speaker, I know that the member isn't asking for an opinion, but it is up to others to set the time and speed of this House. I'm not too sure if I can suggest whether or not we'll be here in that period. I'd be glad to at least make available to all members the documentation and whatever complementary information we have, but to make a commitment that we would debate that particular white paper, which I understand will be released through the week of June the 18th, may well not be within my range of opportunities at this time, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Sturgeon.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the minister, in spite of his statement about those evil old federal government putting in taxes without considering, I'm sure he knows that the Conservative government has put in excise taxes on gasoline and on building supplies that greatly affect both the farming and construction industries here in Alberta. Could he inform the House whether in the imposition of the business transfer tax the idea would be to withdraw all forms of federal excise tax?
Mr. Speaker, of course, we do not attempt to dictate to the federal government what, in fact, they can do within their own constitutional taxing area. And this clearly, this business transfer tax is a federal tax, and it is also within the objectives of the federal government, as I now understand it, to in fact apply this tax to a wide range of commodity sales within our province. But it would in fact replace the so-called manufacturer sales tax, which to some extent is an unfair tax and in fact is not applied proportionally or even equitably against all sectors competing within the economy. And therefore, it is replacing that tax. Mr. Speaker, what I do fear, however, is that with a Conservative government in Ottawa, we do have some justification as to a limit on spending and a reasonable tax policy. But with any other government, driven by social dogma, we can never count on how high that tax may in fact increase.
Member for Highwood, followed by the member for Calgary Mountain View.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Public Works, Supply and Services. I've been negotiating with his department for a long time for new and larger and better quarters for the retired and semi-retired organizations of Edmonton. I wondered if the Minister would describe to me the consequences of his efforts in trying to accommodate these fine citizens.
Mr. Speaker, as a result of the convincing lobby of the Honourable Member for Highwood and support from the Honourable Member from Edmonton Jasper Place, we have concluded negotiations with the Society, and they will be relocated in the Land Titles Building. Discussions are going on currently as to just how much space they will be allotted and the leasehold improvements that will be required.
Thank you. A supplemental to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, would be to, will you also describe to the House the result of your department's negotiation for the property upon which the big rocks are situated?
Mr. Speaker, I'm also pleased to confirm to the House that the Honourable Member's lobbying has again succeeded. On behalf of Alberta Culture, Public Works Supply and Services has successfully concluded negotiations, and we now own your Big Rock site.
This may be a little tougher, Mr. Speaker. Will the member for Highwood be able to lean on you, the Minister of Supply and Services, and your department for moral, physical, and financial support as he portrays to the members of the legislature the goodness of building a Turner Valley Interpretive Centre?
Put two at it.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Honourable Member will have to start his leading in other quarters. We provide a backup service to the lead departments. But I'm also, Mr. Speaker, looking for a way to keep the Honourable Member from leaning on me.
Are you making a representation on behalf of Highwood as well? Or, Westlock Sturgeon, Edmonton Centre.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I was wondering if the Minister would consider helping out the Highwood project by advising that the member for Highwood retain Les Mabbitt and Olympia and York to look after negotiating the deal.
Edmonton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I thought the question began with a reference to the Society for Retired and Semi-Retired's new quarters downtown, further downtown, and as that is in my constituency, I was wondering if I could ask a question of the Solicitor General in terms of what plans he has to beef up support for the Edmonton City Police and other security measures for the elderly who are downtown and now in the further downtown area.
Not bad. 10 years. 10 years. Not bad.
That's reaching, Mr. Speaker, but the authority of policing the City of Edmonton lies with the City of Edmonton Police Department. I understand they have a budget of $78 million, and I'm sure that if the member approached the Police Commission, they could accommodate his wishes.
The chair admits to having been afflicted with spring fever today, because how on earth there was a thread between all that line of questions, God alone knows. Nevertheless, Calgary Mountain View, followed by Edmonton Avonmore, then Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions this afternoon are to the Minister of Social Services. In early February of 1986, 4 autistic young people were removed by the public guardian from a residential treatment center called Delvey Ranches near Clare's home. They were then placed in a program offered by the Social Services Department in Northeast Calgary. However, Mr. Speaker, I understand that full funding for those 4 young people continued to be paid to Delvey Ranches. Would the Minister please tell the House why did the Department continue to pay since early 1986 to a program from which those 4 young people had been removed and for spaces which they did not occupy?
Mr. Speaker, that The area that the honourable member raises was one that certainly caused us a great deal of concern when both the experts, the professionals in the field who deal with a number of handicaps that individuals may have, particularly young people that either have their parents representing them or guardians, and there is a difference of opinion in where those people should be served, as was the case, I understand, over a year ago. It meant that some of the people were housed and treated in different circumstances. The honourable member is quite accurate in saying that the Delvey program continued to be funded in terms of the empty spaces because it was our view that if the program hadn't been funded, those who were receiving treatment there would have been at risk in terms of being able to continue to receive that treatment, as the program would not have had the economy of scale that was necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 3 fully furnished homes were purchased in the Abbeydale community in Calgary to provide apparently a program for between 18 and 24 autistic young people, including the hiring of 22 staff. Why was it, despite these very high costs, Mr. Speaker, that the 4 young people removed from the Delvey Ranch program were the only participants in the Abbeydale program?
Mr. Speaker, as I recall, last year there were more than 4 participants in that program. I certainly will undertake to get the details of that particular program. As obviously the honourable member will know, there are hundreds and hundreds of people in the province of Alberta in various kinds of programs that relate to this area. I did visit one of the Abbeydale homes last year, and I was given to understand, if my memory is correct, that there were more people participating.
Mr. Speaker, 14 months and nearly, I guess, $1 million later, 2 of the 4 young people who were in Delvey are now back in that program. Would the minister admit that officials in the highest levels of her department made errors of judgment in allowing the situation to arise and to continue for such a period of time?
No.
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, this is an area that professionals certainly had a disagreement about. The honourable member has obviously come down in the particular place of one group or an individual professional whose judgment was exercised and in the end accepted in the 2 particular cases. But, Mr. Speaker, I think that with all due respect to the professionals operating in the field, those officials who must ultimately make judgments based on that professional advice do just exactly that, make judgments. And I wouldn't cast any aspersions on them for that judgment, at some times varying with one of the groups of professionals.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Final supplementary to the minister. At a time when there is allegedly very little money for social services, were officials in her department able to mobilize such massive resources because the minister directed them or approved of them to do so?
Mr. Speaker, there is always a projection of the number of people in a program area such as this and other program areas that we believe will be required to be served. Obviously, there are many more people in the city of Calgary and surrounding areas that need to be served in this area, and I believe that the program is being utilized in that respect. The funding, I hope, will continue to be available and in place. The judgment, of course, is with respect to many parents who believed that their children's only hope, or their young people's only hope, was in the particular program at Delvey. A very emotional situation, Mr. Speaker. I believe that if, for instance, Delvey had been closed because the economy of scale had not been there, that I'm sure I would have been hearing from the opposition that money should have never come into the picture and that in any event the program should have stayed open.
Edmonton Goldbar.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the minister, can the minister then tell us why the Abbeydale program was developed at a time when other private non-profit child care organizations with facilities are being shut down?
Mr. Speaker, because a particular type of expertise is needed in that area, and there were no other organizations offering that service.
Further supplementaries? No. Main question, Edmonton Avonmore, followed by Calgary Buffalo.
To the Minister of Social Services. A recent update of a study by the University of Alberta and the Edmonton Public School Board indicates that core city children are generally from large families who have low incomes or who are on social assistance and who have had 2 or more address changes in the last 2 years. Many other studies show that children who live in chronic poverty fail in schools at rates far beyond what we expect or should accept, and that this city core school study offered realistic...
Order, honourable member, and order in the government benches. The member is indeed on the main question and does have the right for 3 short statements, hopefully done rapid fire before we get to the question on this. But this is on the main question, and having admonished, we look forward also from the chair for succinct supplementaries to follow. Thank you.
Thank you. To the Minister, is she willing to follow the Winnipeg example of providing public health support specifically for these schools, and will she consider signing a social worker from her department to every inner-city school?
Mr. Speaker, there certainly is at times a difference in how school systems deliver services. I am cognizant of the fact that some of the systems in our province have their own social services and will have special people working in that regard, particularly in the counseling area where they may view that there are more than the average number of kids that require that type of service. But, Mr. Speaker, it would certainly be my opinion that in any particular region, and it certainly wouldn't be a blanket policy because the regions have a fair degree of autonomy, and I believe that the communities like that autonomy. It would be my view that if a need is identified, that it should be communicated to the Edmonton region and a working out done on that regard.
Mr. Speaker, I was not referring to counseling programs. I was referring to social assistance, because one of the most disturbing problems which affects these children's ability to learn is that they are simply hungry. What action will the minister take to address this problem other than simply relying on charity or blaming parents for mismanaging their inadequate food budgets?
Mr. Speaker, I suppose it's I can look forward to my being quoted as blaming parents in this regard. I hope that everyone has taken notice in this House that it was the honourable member's words, not mine. Certainly I realize the parents in those situations will be having to be very diligent in order to feed their family. But, Mr. Speaker, it's my very firm opinion that the social allowance available and the food budget available to those families is adequate to do the job.
To the Minister of Education, many studies demonstrate that early intervention through preschool programs have lasting beneficial effects and are therefore cost-effective. To the Minister of Education, will she commit herself to funding quality preschool and kindergarten programs, not just in inner-city schools, but in all schools in our province?
Mr. Speaker, we do fund early education programs for students across this province in both a public and a private environment.
I think that they only touch the tip of the iceberg. One important study of preschool programs showed a large drop in the incidence of teen pregnancies amongst former students. Will the minister look into this as part of an effective strategy to reduce teenage pregnancies? That is a full quality education, preschool.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure I fully understand the member's question in terms of the linkage between teenage pregnancy and the program specifically supplied in the early childhood level. But with respect to the teenage pregnancy problem, which is a big problem in this province, the development of our curriculum for career and life management in the secondary curriculum review and the health and personal life skills program for kids from grades 7 to 12 is very much addressing the issue and attempting to work into young people a sense of their own responsibilities in all issues and an attempt to build positive self-images in which they can then go forth and be positive and productive members of the community.
Supplementary information, Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, I think I've realized I have neglected one additional comment that should be made. It is important for all honourable members of the House that when they believe there are special circumstances that affect certain families, because we do hear about the families who are unable to manage, and if those, in those circumstances, it is raised with the family and enforced that they have a right to appeal. We do have appeal committees. They are committees of community citizens who very much understand the community and the ordinary circumstances that all of us find ourselves in, some extraordinary circumstances. And I would just remind honourable members that that's a very important aspect of the social allowance program.
Thank you. Main question, Calgary-Buffalo, followed by member for Edmonton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I have a supplementary with respect to the preceding question as well, and it's a supplementary to the Minister of Community and Occupational Health, and I was wondering whether he might advise the House as to an update on his progress in equalizing in the grants between the Calgary and Edmonton Boards of Health in light of the $1 million shortfall that he concurred in some while ago, and which is, it certainly is because it impacts on nursing care in the public schools in Calgary.
But honourable member, the question get asked. You don't then go on to rationalize the question.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not quite familiar with the funding shortfall that the honourable member is speaking of, but as I mentioned in the Assembly in response to a previous question by the honourable member, I said that I had instructed my officials to prepare such a funding formula that would hopefully begin to move in the direction of eliminating those inequities as amongst the 27 health units in the province.
Further supplementaries? Main question, Calgary-Buffalo, followed by Edmonton Centre.
Supplementary to the Premier, main question to the Premier, Mr. Speaker, and it's clear from comments of the Minister of Career Development and employment outside of the legislature that the government doesn't have any authority for the millions of dollars of lottery expenditures being made.
Honourable member, you rule out of order in violation of Standing Order 23G. Matters before the courts. And this matter will be dealt with in the point of order at the end of question period. Sorry. The matters with respect to the lottery funds, this is already being discussed in the House. If the member wishes to ask a question which does not mention lottery funds, perhaps we'll get a question out.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ask a question that does not refer to the lawsuit, but it certainly relates to lottery funds, and I assume that the Speaker is not telling this House that one cannot ask a question about lottery funds. Point of order, certainly.
Honourable member, the Chair is prepared to give the statement to the House. It was not the Chair that served the civil action, and because civil action within the context, the member needs to be directed to the words which the member himself probably drafted with respect to asking the amount of funds and the delineation thereof. Now,
asking about the lawsuit, Mr. Speaker, but I certainly have every intention of exercising my right to ask about the lotteries, and I would like to do so if the Speaker would allow me to proceed.
Member, the Chair recognizes. Edmonton Centre. Duly noted. Duly noted. Duly noted. Duly noted. Edmonton Centre.
Well, I'll try to take a gamble on these questions, Mr. Speaker. The World Health Organization, Mr. Speaker, together with the Federal Minister of Health and Welfare, Jake Epp, has stated the three greatest concerns for health care
are firstly chronic diseases, secondly mental ill health, and thirdly poverty. The question to the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care: what studies has the Minister done to assess the impact of low-income people on social assistance, people in poverty generally, that they have on the rates of utilization both of the services of Alberta physicians and utilization rates in hospitals?
Speaker, I believe there have been studies along those lines that have been done by others. I don't know that our government has carried out any directly, but certainly the relationship between lifestyles, incomes, male, female, etc., in terms of the use of the medical system is one of the matters that's presently under discussion relative to whether or not the utilization committee between the Alberta Medical Association and my department would undertake to study. One has to view with a fair bit of skepticism at times as to whether or not that information is of a great deal of use.
On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, I think if we were to get poverty and unemployment under control, you'd certainly get health care costs under control in this province. I don't know if the Minister in his tours of facilities throughout the province has had time to visit the Boyle-Macaulay Health Centre or the Queen Alexandra Healthcare Community Health Centres in Edmonton and Calgary, respectively, who deal in a unique way with the people on low income and in poverty. Will the Minister agree to study the benefits of these two particular healthcare centres to determine how efficacious their work is, how they help to reduce utilization at neighboring hospitals, and that, in fact, their role should be expanded in the system?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Agreed to study it, Mr. Speaker? Perhaps I could indicate to the Honourable Minister that board members at the Boyle-Macaulay Health Centre have raised concerns continually that young pregnant women who live in poverty do not have the nutritional food value to carry their pregnancy to term healthfully. What additional funding will the Minister provide to enable the particular Boyle-Macaulay Healthcare Clinic to meet these nutritional needs in and through the clinic?
Well, the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, is dealing with matters that touch upon both the responsibilities of the Minister of Community Occupational Health, the Minister of Social Services, and perhaps my department as well. I'm not familiar with the particular issue that the honourable member raised. If he would like to provide me with some details, I'd certainly be prepared to look into the matter.
As the Minister has agreed to look into the matter, would he please come with me on a visit to the Boyle-Macaulay Healthcare Centre next week?
Mr. Speaker, I visit healthcare facilities in this province on a very frequent basis. In fact, I visited one at 7:30 this morning in Edmonton, and I'll be visiting others over the course of the next few weeks. The honourable member, I hope, keeps as busy a schedule as I do.
Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to finish this series of questions and also to have the Minister of Environment supply supplementary information as raised by questions from Edmonton, Glengarry, or perhaps on a previous day? On this particular matter, the medical issue, all right, supplementary question, Westlock Sturgeon.
Supplementaries to the Minister, point of view, the lack of use of many of the rural hospitals that he is so proud, or his government is so proud of building. Has there been any work progressing about turning many of these into medical centres rather than treatment hospitals which are very poorly used or very ill, not used to the extent that was originally planned?
Mr. Speaker, I don't know where the honourable member continues to get all of the information, which seems to be totally incorrect with respect to the utilization of rural hospitals.
Liberal policy.
It's not. It's not present. It's not presently our intention to. Mr. Speaker, it's not presently our intention to close any rural hospitals in the constituency of West Loch Sturgeon, but we'd certainly be prepared to look at it if the honourable member insists.
Minister of the Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On May the 11th, 1987, the member from Edmonton Glengarry raised several questions with respect to a private enterprise firm in Medicine Hat. Hansard on page 1135 lists two questions. The first question was there a contravention of Section 11 of the Hazardous Chemicals Act regulations? The answer to that question is no. And further on that same page, a question was raised with respect to testing that had gone on the site. Testing takes place on a regular basis and took place on March 11, June 10, and November 13 of 1986, and on April 22 of 1987. And a site inspection is also scheduled for today as well, Mr. Speaker.
Minister. May supplement the same questions put by the honourable member for Glengarry on May 11 on page 1135 of Hansard. I'd like to report that the only contract that Altec Sanitation has in Medicine Hat with the Department of National Defence is the daily dumping of about 50 Johnny-on-the-spot type portable toilets.
That's interesting. The time for question period has expired. The chair recognizes the member for Westlock Sturgeon on a point of order. The chair also intends to continue and to conclude with the point of order as raised yesterday by the member for Calgary Buffalo, and the chair would request with great respect the House Leader for the Liberal Party to be good enough to invite the member to return to the chamber. Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, on the point of order, today's point of order, where the member of our caucus, the member for Calgary Buffalo, was not allowed to continue as soon as he mentioned that the question would be about lotteries. I think if you follow Beauchesne at 358 and 359, I think it's quite clear that as long as the question did not involve a legal opinion or on the other hand was to seek information, I think, Mr. Speaker, in all due respect, I know the word lottery over there has become sort of a trigger word, and as soon as the word is used, people leap to the defense of the government. The point is that, Mr. Speaker, our member was not allowed to enlarge upon what type of question. The question could easily have been on how the lottery is constructed and how it was going, what were the plans, and to just as soon as to use, if you pardon, Mr. Speaker, I feel that you were very hasty, and as soon as the word lottery is mentioned, to rule out of order. I think that although there are questions of order about the lottery and a question about our lawsuit to try to get the government to at least put the funds under public debate and to get at their little kitty, it should not be that fact that we cannot make other questions about the lottery. I can agree with the point of order about whether or not the ministers were interfered with and whether or not the lawsuit will proceed is all right, but that we should be allowed to bring up the lottery. This, in fact, Mr. Speaker, is over $100 million. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. $100 million would get a lot of things done over there. And this is lying off of one spot, and we're not being allowed to ask a question about it. It's not being allowed to come before the committee debates. It's absolutely out there in limbo.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon, the chair listens very carefully to your comments in that regard with respect to the exchange of today. During the chair's intervention with respect to the member for Calgary Buffalo, standing order was indeed cited. Standing orders do take precedence over Beauchesne or Erskine May in this House. The citation was given, and perhaps overnight the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party, together with caucus members of that political party, would indeed see fit to examine Standing Order 23G and perhaps frame appropriate questions which may or may not but which might then be regarded to conform to whatever direction is given to the chair by that standing order. No matter how deeply any individual member may feel about any issue, let us have a gentle reminder. It's not the chair that writes standing orders, nor Beauchesne, nor Erskine and May. And no matter what, the chair must indeed have the House adhere to what the House's own procedures and guidelines are. And with regard to the issue, no matter how framed or not framed, that there is indeed a procedural difficulty which is before the House and in which the chair had intended to rule today. And no matter, the chair can be just as much upset internally as any individual member. And since the member for Calgary-Buffalo has not returned to his place in the chamber, the chair will not rule on the point of order until tomorrow, but be well advised about any kind of questioning with respect to the subject until the point of order has indeed been